An Apache lived in solitude. His name was Dakota, meaning friend to all, though for many years no one had spoken his name aloud, not even himself, because in the silence of the mountains where he had chosen to live, words no longer carried the same weight they once did in the noisy camps of his people or the bustling settlements of strangers. He had withdrawn after years of battles with loss, after watching his brothers fall in wars that seemed to serve no spirit, after feeling his heart crumble when the woman he once loved slipped away into the arms of death, leaving him childless, nameless in the way of family, and unanchored to any home. And so he made his dwelling high in the canyon cliffs, where the wind spoke like an ancient companion and the fire at night was his only heartbeat in the darkness, and the world, with all its cruelty and beauty, watched him but did not touch him. He hunted sparingly, not for joy but for survival, never taking more than he needed, whispering thanks to the deer whose life he ended, gathering herbs not to heal others but simply to keep his own body strong enough to carry his loneliness. And as the seasons turned, people in the nearby village began to speak of the solitary Apache who roamed the hills like a spirit, neither fully alive among men nor fully gone like the dead, and though many feared him, imagining the harshness of his silence meant bitterness, children would sometimes watch for him from a distance, pointing when they caught the flicker of his tall figure against the horizon, a reminder that not all souls find shelter in the company of others. Yet fate, which often bends quietly before breaking like a bow, had woven something different for Dakota, for in a nearby village lived a woman named Elena, a widow of 3 winters, whose heart was heavy but not broken, who still found ways to smile at her children and to plant flowers outside her worn home even though her husband's absence left her nights long and her mornings burdened. She was known not for wealth or beauty but for a kindness so simple it seemed ordinary until one realized how rare it was to find someone who gave without expectation, who carried baskets for neighbors even when her own arms ached, who shared bread even when her pantry was nearly empty, and whose laughter carried the sound of forgiveness itself. Their worlds might never have touched, had it not been for a single, ordinary afternoon that would change both their lives. Elena had walked into the forest to gather firewood and was caught suddenly by the snap of a branch beneath her, the fall sharp and cruel, her ankle twisted badly against the stones, pain radiating so strongly that she could not rise, and as shadows lengthened, fear pressed in on her until the figure of the solitary Apache stepped from the trees. At first she thought she saw a vision, for he moved like a shadow, tall, dark hair falling across his shoulders, his eyes holding the storms of years, but he did not speak. He only knelt beside her, examined her ankle with the gentleness of one who has known pain himself, and without hesitation lifted her as though she weighed nothing, carrying her not back to his solitude but toward her village, a place he had not entered in decades. People stared as the two emerged from the trees, their surprise mingled with suspicion, but Elena, instead of fear, looked at him with gratitude so pure that it pierced something inside him, something he thought had long turned to stone. She thanked him in a voice soft but steady, and he, unused to words, only nodded, placing her gently at the door of her home before disappearing once more into the dusk. Days passed, and Elena healed, but her heart could not forget the silent Apache. She spoke of his kindness to her children, of how even the most solitary soul could carry compassion, and though her neighbors warned her not to seek him, whispering that he was a man of shadows, she believed otherwise, for she had seen the careful way he carried her, the way he avoided the eyes of the fearful crowd, the way his silence seemed less like anger and more like the echo of an old wound. One morning, she prepared a basket of bread and berries and walked into the forest, limping slightly still, searching for him. She found him near the river, mending a net with hands calloused but precise, and when he saw her, he did not rise or flee, only watched her with eyes wary as wild deer. She placed the basket beside him without a word, sat on a stone, and simply let the river's murmur fill the space between them until finally he spoke for the first time in many years. "Why do you come?" His voice was rough, like gravel beneath the foot, yet beneath it trembled a note of vulnerability, and she answered not with fear but truth. "Because you saved me. Because I think you are lonelier than you admit." His eyes flinched, as though she had touched a wound invisible, and for the first time in decades, Dakota felt the warmth of another soul leaning toward his. That day was the beginning of something neither had expected. Elena returned often, sometimes bringing food, sometimes simply her presence, and though at first he spoke little, gradually words returned to him like leaves returning to a bare tree in spring. He told her pieces of his story, the wars, the losses, the silence he chose, and she told him of her husband, the laughter that once filled her home, the nights of tears when her children slept. They were two broken vessels who, by sharing, found themselves holding one another's cracks together. The village began to whisper again, some with judgment, others with wonder. What was the widow doing with the Apache who had abandoned men for solitude? But Elena did not bend to their voices, and Dakota, though cautious, began to feel something stirring in him, an unfamiliar sense of belonging, as though the earth itself was reminding him he was not meant to live and die in silence. The children grew curious, and one day Elena's youngest daughter followed her mother into the forest, peeking from behind trees until Dakota noticed. Instead of frightening her away, he crouched down, offering her a carved wooden bird he had whittled in secret, and the girl's giggle cracked open a part of his heart that had been locked for so long he thought it had ceased to exist. Soon he was no longer a shadow but a guest at Elena's table, awkward at first, unsure of the closeness of walls and the chatter of children, but slowly he adapted, and the warmth of the hearth began to replace the cold silence of his canyon cave. There were struggles, nights when memories of war returned and he withdrew, days when villagers' stares felt sharp as arrows, but Elena's patience never wavered, and little by little he discovered that love was not a thing lost forever but a seed that, even buried under years of sorrow, could sprout again if watered by kindness. The turning point came one harsh winter, when illness swept the village, taking down strong men and fragile children alike. Elena herself fell ill, her body weak and trembling, and for the first time Dakota faced the possibility of losing the light that had guided him back from shadows. He tended her night and day, gathering herbs, whispering prayers he had long forgotten, refusing to leave her side. The villagers, seeing his devotion, began to see him not as an outsider but as a protector, a man whose silence had hidden not bitterness but wounds. Elena recovered, slowly but surely, and in her first steps outside after weeks in bed, she found Dakota waiting with a small bundle of wildflowers, his rough hands shaking as he offered them, his eyes filled not with solitude but with love unspoken. In that moment she understood that this man who had lived apart from the world was no longer alone, that she had given him not just bread or shelter but the courage to belong again, and he had given her not just protection but the profound reminder that love can bloom again even after the cruelest winter. Their bond grew, not through dramatic vows but through daily acts of tenderness, the mending of clothes, the laughter shared over children's games, the quiet prayers at dawn, and slowly the village ceased whispering, for they could not deny the goodness that radiated from their union. Dakota was no longer the solitary Apache of the mountains but a father in all but blood, a partner in all but name, and Elena, once a widow burdened with loss, was now a woman whose love had transformed not only her life but his. Together they taught the village something that words alone could not. That kindness heals deeper than suspicion, that compassion can turn fear into belonging, and that even the loneliest soul can be reborn in the warmth of another's heart. And so the story of the Apache who once chose solitude but found love in the arms of a widow lived on, not in the whispers of fear but in the songs of gratitude, reminding all who heard it that no wound is too deep for love to reach, no exile too far for compassion to follow, and no heart too broken to be made whole when touched by genuine care, for in the end, we do not save each other with grand gestures but with the simple, steadfast act of giving one another a home.